Our next question, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from the Iceman Parsons Project.
Oh, that's great. I don't care what the question is. That's the greatest name I've ever heard.
Jim, what exactly is a Damaja?
Well, that was a guy named Danny Holly from Seymour, Indiana, that was the third most famous resident of Seymour, Indiana, after John Cougar Mellencamp and Rip Rogers. And I said the same thing because before I came to OVW, he was already here. And I was reading the descriptions of the results from OVW or whatever, but I hadn't talked to Danny Davis about the roster yet. And this was when I was preparing to leave Connecticut, come back to Louisville, and we were going to do the developmental program at OVW. And I said, Danny, one day I said, who is Damaja? And he laughed. He said, no, it's Damaja. I said, okay, now I get it. The Damaja, I'm going to damage you. That was basically Danny's picked his own gimmick and his own name when he started training with Rip and Danny Davis. Danny Holly, I should say. There's two Dannys there. Danny had trained Doug Basham first. Doug was his nephew. And then they started OVW, him and Rip, as a training school, and they trained Nick Dinsmore and Rob Conway. And then probably about 6 months before I came down in summer of 99, Damaja showed up, and they were all amazed by his aptitude. Not only was he was 6'2" or 6'3" and like 220, 230 and 19 years old, but you couldn't blow him up. And they were masters at blowing guys up. His cardio was ridiculous, and he got he was a fan. He'd watched wrestling. So he got the business visually. He could see it in his head. He got it mentally. Having Rip and Danny as trainers, you learn to think about wrestling the right way instantly. And I started watching the tapes, and I said, this fucking kid, how long has he been training? At that time, he'd started in December of 98 or whatever, and it was May of 99. I said, all right, I can do something with this fucking guy. And as soon as I got here, the one thing was he had a manager. Her name was Treasure. And I've said they must have named her that because of that sunken chest that she had. Because she had, some way or another, she was the girlfriend of one of the guys that had been in the class and et cetera, and she'd become a manager. But she was like 10 years older than Damaja and looked like it. And I said, and he was a heel at that point. I said, this guy is 19, 20 years old. He's going to be cool for the young people. So even before I'd got here, I started booking the show and faxing it down to Danny, and I split them up real quick. And then for the next 3 or 4 years, he was one of the 4 pillars of the company. I mean, you had guys like Flash Flanagan. You had guys, Trailer Park Trash was still working at the time, and you had a few veterans that could come in and out and work with the guys. But the pillars in the ring, my best workers, the best students that Danny and Rip had, and all homegrown guys were Doug Basham, Nick Dinsmore, Rob Conway, and the Damaja. And so they bounced the OVW championship back and forth amongst all of them. When Mike Bucci, Nova, came in, he had enough experience. I put him right in that mix. But generally, it was Damaja, Basham, Conway, and Dinsmore teaching all the guys at the start of the developmental program in the ring as well, because they were on the job training. They were the best workers and the farthest along, so I'd put them in with guys that were coming up. So and then finally, of course, obviously, they ended up, Doug Basham and Damaja were the best heel tag team in the business. In 2004, fucking athletic, young, ripped. Basham was fucking ripped. He had like 4% body fat. Dano was never a fucking bodybuilder guy, but he had the size, but he could do nip-ups at that size and fucking at the same time looked like a grown man. Great promo. And they take them up there and make them fucking blithering, simpleton, undercard idiots for that fucking Linda Miles, the worst female talent up until Jane Cargill that's ever crossed into a wrestling ring. And they were, because she had a striking look, the writers wanted to write the team around her instead of ignoring the fact that we said she's the worst female student we've ever had and she's never going to get this at all. And she had no knowledge of how to be a dominatrix. So that killed him. And then, oh, it was fucking brutal. Talk about giving somebody a fucking gimmick that they have no bearing in real life to whatsoever. And so that pretty much buried him. And then I tried to get him a spot in TNA, but at that point, Danny was pretty much fed up with the wrestling business, and he didn't really care. And one time they were supposed to be there, him and Doug, and they didn't send him a plane ticket because it was TNA and they didn't have their shit together, but he didn't call to ask for it because he just figured, well, they don't want me and I don't care because I hate wrestling now because it was my life, but I've worked for the WWF. So they got mad at him for not calling to ask why they didn't send him a ticket to the place he was supposed to be and said, well, he doesn't care. So then Doug had a fucking tryout match as a single, and Doug at that time could outwork probably 75% of the TNA roster. But he gets in a ring, and within 3 minutes, he wants to impress everybody, so he fucking does a spot where he takes his big bump out of the goddamn ring, but he forgets it's a 6-sided ring, and they've got those steel stairs everywhere, and he flies headfirst through the ropes on a side that the stairs are on that you wouldn't think because did I mention 6 sides of this fucking ring? And he knocked himself out. Couldn't get back in the ring. A legitimate count out. I said, well, fuck me. And so that was that. So, I mean, so that's what the Damaja was, and that's what he could have been, and that's what they all could have been. But as we've mentioned, I would say everybody talks about how much talent they got out of OVW and the WWE. I would say 60% of the guys that should have been there never got the chance or never got a real chance. So it would have been ludicrous, the amount of guys they would have got from OVW if they hadn't buried half of them by trying to change their gimmick or change them or make them do something stupid or work with a fucking moron that they were in love with. Damaja was one of those. And I don't think he's wrestled. That was 2000, probably 7, 8. He probably hadn't wrestled since then. Last time I saw him, he had a full head of hair. It's funny, guys used to lose their hair in the wrestling business. Now they're bald when they wrestle and they get out of the wrestling business. They grow their hair back.
Have you seen recent pictures of Honky Tonk Man?
I have not.
He's full Wayne Ferris. Long gray hair, long gray beard. It looks like punk rock Wayne Ferris grew up. It's pretty cool to see. It's on social media. I'm sure you'll be flooded with photos of Honky Tonk Man in the next few hours.